Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us on this latest episode of Startups Unedited. Today I'm joined by Roee Hartuv, who is a pricing and go-to-market expert. Roee and I met, I would say, maybe a year or two ago, give or
Yeah,
take, right?
almost, yeah.
Yeah, and you were at a really popular Silicon Valley firm that helps with go-to-market strategies and all sorts of things around the topic. And I know now you are specifically focused on pricing, which is a hot topic in this AI revolution. Rowie, how are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you just taking the time again to share your insight. As I alluded to, I think unless you're not paying attention, AI is taking over basically everything here on planet Earth, including the pricing models
Yeah.
that we employ in B2B and SaaS and so on. And I think there are a couple reasons why that is the case. Real quick, let's just dive in because I know a lot of folks are very, very excited about this question. Like, is SaaS pricing broken right now? And should we be like, panicking around kind of like the adoption of some of the models or strategies that folks are talking about as it relates to AI, especially with AI, quote unquote, AI native taking over so much of the market?
Yeah, I think so. But let's dive into what exactly is SaaS pricing. Because if you take the traditional way to do pricing in SaaS, which is most commonly seat based, user based, yes, I think that model is broken. And there are several different reasons. Maybe I'll touch on just two of the main ones. First of all, when you think about this, AI comes to replace humans or make us more productive, right? That's everybody's talking about. Like, is AI going to replace me in my job? And if you're a company that offers AI, at the end of the day, you want to create more productive users so they can do more with less. So instead of selling to 10 different users to do a certain amount of work, maybe you can replace with your AI tool, I don't know, five, seven of these team members and just have three using your tool. So we're basically making your users, your customers more productive. And what does that mean? If you are selling on a seat based, that means that instead of selling 10 seats, you're now selling only 5 seats or 3 seats. That's 50% of the revenue. That is why, for example, Mark Benioff, I don't know, 6 months ago introduced a new outcome based or agent based pricing compared to the traditional, and this is Salesforce, right? Salesforce introduced us the seat based model back in early 2000s. And Mark Benioff moved into that outcome based pricing for the AR solutions. They went back and yeah, are testing out hybrid models right now, but that's basically the first reason why traditional SaaS seat based pricing models or metrics are broken. The second thing is that when you think of it, traditional SaaS had anywhere between 70 to 90, 95% margins. That means the additional cost to serve another customer was almost zero. It was almost free. Why? Because it's you build the software once and everybody uses the same software. You just need to allocate a bit cost to, I don't know, compute power or storage, maybe a bit of service team, but that's basically it. It almost comes at zero cost to serve an additional customer. However, we do know, and thereby not providing or building the optimum pricing model, yeah, you can get away with it. As long as you keep on growing and selling more and adding more customers, yeah, the revenue will just come in zero, almost zero costs, and therefore you're most probably are generating revenue and most likely and profitable on that. However, we know that AI comes at a cost. Margins now, it's everybody's testing and new models coming left and right, so we don't know, but estimation says 50% margins. I've
Yeah.
seen companies with negative margins, but it's no longer almost zero cost to serve an additional customer. So that means that if we could have gotten away with suboptimal pricing in the past, now that every new customer that you bring in has a cost, and some of them you could actually lose money on them, requires us to rethink how we're pricing. And that is goes to your comment earlier. Is AI breaking our SaaS pricing? Yes.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about kind of some of the examples you provided, because like frankly, I've deployed Salesforce recently in the last 6 months or so at some of my advisory clients, and we're not using any of that outcome based. It's the
Yeah.
seat based stuff, right? So I understand that Mark, sort of announced that, and there's a lot of buzz around it, but I actually haven't seen it. And I use a ton of different tools, like this
Mhm.
tool that we're using to
Mhm.
record this podcast episode, right? Like tons of tools. I just haven't come across anything that's outcome based. So if you think about kind of where that's at in terms of its maturity curve, where would you say it's sort of currently residing?
So outcome based is relevant for very narrow markets in terms of when you think of it, Salesforce is a horizontal solution. They support a lot of different types of companies. Not all of them are classical SaaS companies, but a lot of different companies that use CRM. A CRM needs a CRM platform. That means that the outcome is different from one segment to the other. And that is why it's very hard to capture what is that correct outcome. On the contrary, if you are selling to a very niche market, for example, I have a customer, they sell a manufacturing floor management system for the pharmaceutical industry. It's a very narrow segment. The outcome is almost identical between all of their different types of customers. So the outcome is relatively easy for us to define together and then create a pricing metric around that outcome. Again, so we use two examples. Another clear example is the the common AI solution, ChatGPT, for example. ChatGPT serves a lot of different customers, horizontal solution. I might use it for my advisory work. I have my wife, she's an interior designer. She uses it for an AI. My outcome that I'm getting from the platform is totally different than my wife. It's impossible for ChatGPT to price on outcomes, and that's why they charge us $20 or $200 a month.
Yeah.
They could never, probably, unless they have pricing for specific segments. But that's basically, yeah, outcome why it's hard and why it's not a solution for every type of company out there.
One question I had around this outcome based pricing models and kind of why they're potentially challenging for certain types of companies, and to your point, valuable to others. How do you start to kind of value, right? Like put literally assign a quantitative value to a particular outcome when maybe the past has been again seat based or maybe some usage based and these sort of things, and when we've never really had outcome based compensation with the exception of like sales, right? Or and
Yeah,
some other, maybe there's some bonuses and things like that. But that's a little easier to actually organize internally, right? But
yeah.
when we're talking about like units of outcomes, right? Let's just call it let's say it's a sales email engagement
Mhm,
platform,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Like what are you going to do? Are you going to define outcome as someone responds to your email, or is it they respond to your email and purchase the product. And then now you're starting to get into a world of tremendous risk as a vendor, right? Like how are you going to like offer a solution, incur all this cost, and then only if there's a performance-based piece there that you're going to get compensated or paid as a vendor.
Exactly. So first of all, outcome comes with a risk, right? If you're not providing the outcome, they could use your product and not getting the outcome that you define, you're not going to get paid. So of course that comes with a huge risk. But let's assume that we figured it out and our product is generating that value, just generating that outcome. You're onto something very correct. Like, we need to make sure that both we as a company define what the outcomes are and that the customers that buy agree with us on that definition. Because you don't want to be in a situation that you define an outcome. Let's say another example is ticket closed. Like, that's a very common use case that we have in the market. So companies that do support tickets and are able to close that using AI. And Fin AI is a company that does that, and they take $1 per ticket closed. Fantastic. But what is a ticket closed? Is it closed when the client gets a response? Is it closed when 2 days after, when we don't get a response? Do we reopen a ticket if the client comes to us 2 weeks after with the same problem or a slightly different problem? So we need to make sure that the client understands and agrees to the outcome that we define. Now, then the next question you ask is, how do we put a price tag next to that outcome? And that is actually simple, and we've all done that. And you work a lot with early stage companies. It's like, let's interview our customers and ask them, what is the value that they will get if we solve that problem for them? So what is ticket closed? How much are you currently paying to support a given ticket? Like, let's take an average ticket. You put a human, they spend 5 minutes on chat or on the phone or emails, 5 minutes of your rep's time. What does that mean? Is it $1? Is it $10? Okay, so you know what is the value. And then, okay, let's say it's $10 for 5 minutes to close a service ticket. Is it $10? Do we want to take the full $10? Probably not, because then the client would not see any value in that. But is it somewhere in the middle? Is it 2 or 5 or 7? That is a conversation to have. But yeah, that's the how we actually capture what is the value of the outcome.
One question I have as you're articulating this is, what if the product's no good or not good enough, right? Like, using that example that you talked to, right? Like tickets and customer support and these sort of things, right? So let's just talk about scenario one, where the AI takes the entire conversation, there's no human intervention, and is working through that, and it's trying to solve the problem, but the product, okay, is Fin, right? So Fin being, let's just use that example, Fin is now communicating with its customer, right? And there's just tremendous bugs, right? And so now the outcome is actually being impacted, or the ability to execute against the closed ticket outcome is being impacted by the fact that the product is no good. So that's a scenario one, or not good enough, or super buggy. Or there's another example, which is maybe Fin then hands it over to a human, because I know there's those hybrid workflows, and then the human's no good. They're taking too long to answer, these sort of things. And now Fin's ability to actually monetize or provide that outcome is being impacted by these variables that it doesn't have any control over.
Yeah, it's a great question, but you and I are both go-to-market experts, and usually when it comes up, I exclude myself and say, hey, I'm assuming that your product is fantastic. I'm a go-to-market advisor, a pricing advisor. I assume that your product actually delivers the value that you're saying. And if not, then it's a product problem. It's not a go-to-market or commercial problem. Having said that, You did touch, and I like what Finn did. So a lot of, usually that type of question is customers that are adopting AI solutions, they're afraid of the risk. Like, what happens if your product does not deliver the solution that you did? Like, how can I trust an AI to engage with my asset, which is my customers, right? My most important asset. And what Finn did, I think it's brilliant. They have created an insurance. So if you read in their website the fine print, if their AI solution causes any harm, they have an insurance of up to $1 million to compensate for that. So that is a brilliant way to lower the risk on the customer side. So this is something, of course, not every company could put aside a few millions for that insurance.
Intercom can, but your standard startup might not be able to do that, right?
Yeah. But I think what they did is absolutely fantastic. So even if you don't have $1 million, you can find other ways to mitigate the risk. For example, if the AI doesn't solve it, then we put in a human to solve it, and then it's
Awesome. So for the folks out there who are asking the question, has AI killed seat-based pricing models? I know you alluded to it earlier, but what is your official take on it?
I believe that, yes. I believe that because of the two reasons that I specified, and additional ones as well, yes, we need to create a mechanism, a pricing metric that makes sure that our revenue is is above the cost element, like the cost of serving our customers. And if you don't have that mechanism in place, you might find yourself that the costs are higher than the actually revenue that you're generating. I'd like to give you an example. I'm currently working with a company. They're doing AI wrapper for marketing purposes. Very successful company. They went from classical SaaS, like SaaS native, and added an AI component. They went to the market with 4 different offerings. One of them, they did not put the right guardrails in place, and they're actually losing a lot of money. I'm talking 7 figures a month, because their most the users that use the platform the most are just costing them a lot of money. And actually, out of the 4, profitable company bootstrapped, and they were profitable before that, but they introduced 4 months ago, they introduced the AI component, and they're actually losing a lot of money on that single product that was introduced with AI. So
Interesting. Well, what would you say for the founders or CEOs out there who are implementing pricing models? I know you've worked on this quite a bit over your career. What would you say are kind of like the biggest mistakes that you're seeing founders implement, particularly around pricing? Of course, I've worked on so many startups and have seen pricing models change drastically, and it's kind of a moving target. But what would you say is that kind of like, if you had to summarize it, the biggest mistakes?
So I think it's along what you just said. It's a moving target. Pricing is not static. Like 10 years ago, when we did SaaS, when we worked in SaaS companies, you could define a pricing model and then not revisit that 5-7 years ago after. With AI, it's a moving target, because the models keeps on changing. The cost to serve keeps on changing, going up, going down sometimes. New models coming in that completely change our cost structure. All this requires us to see pricing as an ever-changing and take an agile approach. Same as we're doing with our products, an agile approach to product development. Good for me, bad for the market, but it's also something that we need to constantly evaluate and test and improve. Just for, again, OpenAI changed our pricing model 10 times in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
Claude, they're not changing the actual pricing model, but what they're doing is the packaging and usage and credits and all that is part of the packaging and the structure of pricing when you think of it. I don't know, every week they're changing my terms and conditions. All these companies, and these are the best companies in the world, and they are AI native companies, they're testing out, they're figuring out what are the right revenue monetization strategies.
Yeah.
And if they're doing it, then all the rest of us probably need to follow that as well.
Yeah. I keep thinking about all the startups that I've been involved with over the last 25 years. And one thing that always comes to mind is the idea that, for example, I've seen a lot of founders kind of just look at solutions out in the space and go, okay, that's cool. I'm going to do, let's just for conversation's sake, okay, I'm going to do a per seat model and, and then that's it. Or I'm going to do a usage-based model and these sort of things. And the reality is that what I found is that because we're also, of course, early stage, right? We're also kind of trying to very much figure out product market fit and validate who we're selling to, who are truly the buyers, right? Because the buyer, let's say at a pre-seed or seed stage startup, is likely to change. I mean, not always, but likely to change when you start to hit escape velocity and start to grow, right? And so I'm going to just give kind of a generic example for the folks out there in the audience. I was part of this go-to-market tech startup a couple years ago, and we had a product that could be used by multiple stakeholders, right? Let's just call it sales, marketing, customer success, sales engineering, and even product. And the reality is that the way that each user or stakeholder, user type in the organization actually executed their workflows and that were going to use the product were largely different. Like the way that marketing would use the product would be different than sales. And so you had these kind of like user types and behavior internally that were conflicting as a result, then causing disruption around what the model would be. So we ended up going to market early on with a model that was more attuned to the marketing use case, where the marketers would put the product on the website, and then we were charging around basically how many instances of the product was on the website. So let's say it would be one, right? So one instance of the product on the website, maybe two, if you're lucky. And so it would be priced on that. And like you could imagine, like if that was the case, there was no way that we could have a seat-based model, because then you're talking about what you're going to make on, $100 or whatever a month or something. Sales would then use this same product and same instance in a very different way. They would use it potentially multiple times a day, times number of sales reps. Now, now a seat-based model would be actually more viable, right? So we had this situation where, again, the product could be used by multiple user types. They were conflicting, and it was just a mess.
Yeah. This is where packaging comes in, right? How do you package it differently in this case? And again, just by what you described, it seems like we need two different packages, one to serve that type of user base and the other for the sales type of user base, and basically price them differently. But again, that adds a level of complexity, and just with a lot of other things in go-to-market, there's the scale, right? We want to keep it simple for the velocity, to make it easier, let's say, for the sales team to just close a deal, and we don't mind leaving money on the table just to make the sales process move slowly. Or we want to add complexity in order to capture that value, not leave money on the table, and make sure that we capture all the willingness to pay of the different types of users and segments. And that is the conversation, like where do we want to play on in the scale that I just drew for us.
Yeah, awesome. And for the founders out there and startup professionals, that's why I would argue, and I'm very, very biased, but I am biased against arguing for focus early on, right? Like going way too wide early on. Sometimes you'll raise a bunch of money and you're like, oh, you can see the possibilities. But this is a classic reason why you stay in one lane. Yes, there are other lanes that you can sort of approach or attack later on, but stay in one lane, validate that, figure out if you're going to continue to move forward. If not, course correct, try that other one, etc. But it's just impossible it's very, very difficult. I know OpenAI and Claude or Anthropic and all these folks, they've been able to do some things that are uncommon, right? That we have literally never seen before. I get that. But we also don't know where they started, right? So like we're seeing what exists today. So just for the founders and CEOs out there, I highly recommend focusing on one lane, really figuring that out. And then over time, because to Roe's point as well, like being able to enable the complication he alluded to, enabling sales reps, for example, if you're going in, changing the model and saying, okay, well, we don't even have something that necessarily has strong product market fit yet. And now you're having to tell 4 different stories and none of them are viable yet. This is just very difficult. So just wanted to say that out there for the founders and early employees at startups. Focus. Roee, just as we kind of wrap up and you're thinking about some final thoughts for founders, CEOs, go-to-market professionals out there, maybe even just some reps who can take this information and use it to communicate to leadership like, hey, this is some sort of insight that I've been able to get from a pricing expert out there who's worked with countless, successful startups and larger organizations to build out pricing models. Here's some tactics here that I should think about to be able to influence our pricing, or at least take a more like methodical, strategic approach to figuring that out.
Yeah. So let's continue on that line that we have. If you're implementing AI, you have to know your cost structure. You need to understand your unit economics. Unlike SaaS, again, SaaS had almost 95, the best ones had 95 gross margins, right? Doesn't matter your cost, you can just focus on the top line revenue. But if you're adding AI, the cost is real. And if you don't look and calculate costs and make sure that your cost does not exceed your revenue, how much you charge for your customers, or at least most of your customers, you can lose on some, but in general, you need to be profitable. You need to understand that part of the unit economics. And I'm not saying it's different. A lot of SaaS companies lost money, right? That's obvious. That's why we're VC backed. We go to investors, they give us money. We're losing money. We're not profitable. But that's different because that money was spent on supporting growth, hiring more people for the sales team, for the product team, in order to continue to fuel that growth. But if we're subsidizing our customers because they're using too much of our infrastructure and AI, that, basically we're going into a collapse of our margins. So, you need to understand your cost structure and unit economics.
Awesome. Roee, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights. For the folks out there who are watching this or listening to this episode and want to learn more about pricing, potentially engage you as a advisor, what are the best channels to reach you or maybe even follow your content?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best channel. We have a ton of information on YouTube, our YouTube channel, willingness2pay.com. We have basically a video or a few videos on every topic. So check that out if you're interested to learn more. A lot of the topics that we discussed today, how to run a pricing project, etc. ton of information there.
Awesome. And if you love this episode, go ahead and click on subscribe on YouTube. Give us a like here on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. We're all over the place, and have a great day.